me being like a young buck, and some of the guys that are young bucks as well, like we don't know things pre like maybe the 2000s, like when we came into the game. So now it's like you are part of arguably two of the most influential brands that built the sports nutrition industry. So I guess I'll let you just kind of talk, because
no, absolutely.
I'm not going to do it justice.
Yeah, I'm 48 now, so I've been around a little while. I've been able to learn a lot by being in the industry for over 25 years. And I had the great fortune of starting in the supplement industry right when DSHEA was passed. So the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act was passed. And I was in college, and some friends of mine, Bill Phillips and Sean Phillips, had started a company. Then it was called Natural Supplement Association. So Bill used to type a newsletter. He used to distribute that out by mail. I think he copied it at Kinko's and would take it out to mail. It was very informative literature, and it was very helpful to people in the gym working out and trying to understand how to eat right and how to use supplements. And then I think he started talking about anabolic steroids as well, because there was nothing around at that time to help people kind of understand it, right? And in that newsletter, would distribute other people's products. So like Ultimate Orange from Dan Duchesne, and I mean, if you want to Google that one, that goes way back, right? Dimetadrine, which was the first ephedrine hydrochloride. I was fortunate to come in when they had a product that was called Metrix. Some people call it MedRx, but Metrix, I think, was the intended name. That was a partnership between Bill Phillips, Jeff Everson, who was the prior editor-in-chief of Muscle and Fitness, and Dr. Scott Connolly. And it was a product that was a base plus, your protein and your carbs, kind of mixed it together. It was like a science experiment. That was the first meal replacement powder to hit the market. So this was creating a whole new category that was above and beyond just protein, and it was about really transforming your physique, right? Going from, kind of having this okay physique or being bulky but not in shape, to now I'm in shape and I look really good. And it just blew open the doors to the concept of what supplementation could provide, right? And along the way, Bill Phillips continued to utilize his newsletter, which then became Muscle Media 2000, which later became just Muscle Media. That was a direct form of communication to consumers, right? And it was originally just through the mail. You had to call. This is pre-internet, so there was no internet yet. So let's get that straight. That's how far back I go. And
do you ever tell your kids that you're older than the internet?
Oh, they just can't understand. They just can't fathom that. They don't understand how the world operated without the internet, right? And in some ways, I don't either. It's hard to fathom that how business is so much faster today than it ever is and ever has been because of the internet. It just keeps getting faster. And so we were, at that time, we were a direct-to-consumer marketing company. The magazine served as a medium to directly communicate with consumers, and the products were distributed. So the Metrix, still distributing Ultimate Orange and Dimetadrine, and then I think Bill and Connolly had a bit of a parting of ways based on the strategy for the product, right? Connolly wanted to take it into mass market retail. Bill didn't think it was ready for that yet. He didn't think mass market was ready for kind of hardcore sports nutrition supplements. He wanted to really capitalize more on direct to consumer and specialty markets. So I had a parting of the ways. Just prior to that, though, we were already distributing a product line from Anthony Almond and Ed Bird, a brand called EAS, and it was the first creatine monohydrate to really be commercialized on the market. And again, coming from lifting weights my entire life, being a competitive bodybuilder, the first time you ever used creatine, and years before that you had used other things, dibencoxide and Similac and all these things that just didn't work but promised all these great results. You tried creatine, and all of a sudden you had this zero-calorie, non-ergogenic aid that actually worked, and you could see and feel the effect, and it was like, wow, right? This is like as close to an anabolic steroid as possible, but it's a supplement, right? And then there was GKG and V2G, which was vanadyl sulfate and glutamine. And that really just created a whole new vacuum of consumers where they saw this as a good natural aid to their lifting and wanting to develop muscle mass. So metrics transitioned into what became EAS, and then I spent the next 5 or 6 years traveling the world, setting up distributors in 55 countries around the world. I set up manufacturing in Essen, Germany, and New Zealand, set up a distribution center in Tilburg in the Netherlands, and really got to learn all facets of the business. From, we had to reformulate products for all the European countries, we had to get them registered, I had to understand logistics, I had to understand how to get our distributors set up with marketing and how to build the brands in those countries. So I really got exposed to every single facet of the business. And I also, at the time, I was very fortunate because of Sean Phillips allowing me to have the freedom to do that. Because one, there still was no internet, so I was doing this with just good old-fashioned books and learning as I go, and just talking to people and traveling a lot. And I was able to operate under my own P&L, my own profit and loss statement. So I was kind of responsible for my own destiny. Could I do this? Could I grow this? And we did. We grew, incredibly well over those years. And then when EAS was bought out by North Council Partners prior to Abbott Laboratories, that's when I stepped out with Sean Phillips. We started at that time. That was during the big and first internet boom. So it was the 1.0, right? The internet was just starting to come off. In fact, funny story, I still remember, prior to leaving at EAS, I still remember Ryan DeLuca coming in to visit EAS and saying, guys, this thing I have called bodybuilding.com and the internet is going to be the biggest reselling site ever. You want to be on it. And we all just kind of chuckled and went, go play on that internet thing, right?
Because he used to sell like a ton of creatine. Like that's where I think he originally started, right? Was selling a lot of creatine through bodybuilding.com.
I got to give Ryan a ton of credit. Whether he knew this in the beginning or not, he created something that ended up just getting sucked up into Google, which ended up benefiting the company. Was he created a content site and he created an e-commerce site, and he interwove the two from connections back and forth. And at that time, that's what Google loved, right? So it sucked him up organically. He owned every word out there. And what was great and smart about what he did was, on the content side, he allowed anyone to come in and write for them. He made it an open source, right? It wasn't like, hey, you have to qualify and you had to be a literary writer and go to school. It was just like, if you want to write something, write it and publish it, right? So he collected so much content, which kept driving him up more and more in organic search. And then he would link that through to the products, and then he made every product available possible. But you're right, he started with just something as simple as just creatine, right? And I have to give him credit for what he built, because it became $500 million retailing site, and the number one, and then everybody was a distant second. Anyway, going back, so we stepped out, and in the internet 1.0, we started with a concept. A lot of people probably don't know and have never heard of it, but we started with a website called Nutros, and it was intended to be a nutrient organized search, right? Okay. So what our concept was, and this was really Sean's brainchild, was people are going to search, and they're going to come in and search nutrient words or ingredient words or popular things that they have heard of in the industry, and then we would give content on that and education on that, and then our idea was to link them through to any reseller who was selling that product at the best possible price and give them options, right? And this is kind of just prior to when shopping bots and all that started to come around. So this was a great novel concept. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get the economic engine part of it to work. And we saw the opportunity right after, and that was when the first .com had its big bust, right? When all the websites went under, they were all overfunded and underappreciated in terms of their true value to consumers, and the big bust. And then we looked and said, okay, what's the one thing we know how to do? We know how to build a brand, right? So our non-competes had run off from EAS, and so we developed Isotory. And at that time, our first product was Lean System 7. It was a fat burner concept. We did an exclusive license with an ingredient called 7 Keto, and our position was, we saw ephedrine starting to hit its demise, right, where it was getting a lot of negative publicity. So we said, what if we had something that was equally or better as effective in terms of the science and the data in weight loss, but non-stimulant, right? And so we positioned it against ephedra. We did add other things like guarana and caffeine to give it a mild stimulant effect, but it didn't have that ephedrine, I'm going to hang from the ceiling effect. And Lean System 7 just skyrocketed. And so we built iStory off the backs of that product over time, and really build a great brand over time. That what we found that we were really good at iStory was building these new brands that we could then sell off, right? We never quite had all the resources we needed to get behind all these brands that were a little bit outside of our focus and our core. For instance, the brand we talked about earlier, I did a brand with a joint venture with Joel Apple called Voots. It was a children's supplement. Well, I don't come from selling children's supplements. I came from selling sports nutrition. So we developed this children's supplement, was incredibly successful, and then we sold it off to PharmaBite. So we built these other brands over time. We built the first non-GMO vegan small vitamin line before GMO, non-GMO was kind of a thing, and then sold that off. And then, we built biogenetic laboratories. And so we built these sub-brands that we would get really good at building these great brands and building them up just enough to make them attractive for somebody to want to purchase them. And then in 2012, we took iStory public. That was incredibly stressful, but educational. I would never do that again. Going public, being the CEO of a public company is changes your whole focus, right? You go from working in your business and on your business to now spending 70% of your time managing the market and shareholders. Very distracting, and just wasn't in my DNA. But we did it. It was educational. I learned a lot. We went public, gave us a lot of access to a lot of capital, allowed us to continue to expand our brands. We had one brand in mass market that was doing exceptionally well called Energize, which was an all-day sustained release energy pill. We had positioned it against 5 Hour, and we did exceptionally well. And in fact, it's still in Walmart today. It's still one of their top sellers in pharmacy, and it's been in there for 15 years. And we then merged in 2015 with FitLife Brands. Like for like merger basically is what we did. And then at that time, FitLife was really the brand inside the GNC franchises that made them successful. We had a successful merger, and then we just had some differences of opinion about the strategy going forward. I really started to see the market forces at play in retail. I saw GNC as sort of the Titanic. We were a little bit overextended on GNC. I saw specialty starting to die off to a certain degree. Not necessarily die off, just morph and change, right? And all these market forces were at play to where, for me, I felt very strongly about we have to control our destiny, and that destiny can be controlled through direct consumer marketing and owning that marketing relationship with the consumer in a one-to-one, not through a retailer, not through a wholesaler, but one-to-one. And going back to the roots of, all metrics in EAS were always a direct consumer marketing. They own that relationship. And, that's where we started to have a difference of opinion, because the board just didn't see the value of that. And it requires, like we were talking, it requires a mindset. It requires, resource allocation towards an investment in building that business unit. It requires the skill set to do it really well. And so I then planned my exit, exited from the company, handed over my board seat. And then at that time, there were what are now the 4 other owners of QuickBox Fulfillment, where I'm at now. This is where I made the flip, right? I went from 20 years in sort of brand building, sports nutrition, weight loss products, mainly in brick and mortar, to I'm going to flip over to the other side, and I'm going to be a service provider now to that market, right? And the reason I wanted to do that is, one, I had 4 other business partners. They've all been owners of brands before in different industries, nutrition, food, cosmetics. So we all had this mindset of, we understand what it's like to be a brand. We understand direct-to-consumer marketing. So we understand all the pinch points and the pain points and the landmines that exist that they don't know about. So we can now generate systems and processes that are fully in support of a brand in health and wellness, and from a direct-to-consumer mindset. So every system and process is engineered around that, right? So we know how to be flexible. We know how to scale very quickly. We know the importance of processing every order on time every day and with accuracy. We know the importance of time to home. We know the importance of how great that product looks when they open the box and it's in the right order and the right setting and the box looks, that whole unboxing that everybody does on social media. All of that is part of the brand experience. Now, nobody knows who QuickBox is. The consumer certainly doesn't. But we're a representation for our clients of that consumer experience. And because I've come from the brand side, I can take a lot of pride in how that brand experience plays out. And I do take a lot of pride in it. I mean, take it very personal when I go out on the floor and I'm watching how we're, putting these orders together and how they're going out and looking at time to home and looking at, all the factors that play into that customer experience. So it's been a great transition to come to the other side and now be able to offer some experience to some of these younger brands that are growing, and be a part of the explosion of e-commerce in general, right? I mean, industry growing at 18%, and you might know or see different data than that, but I think even that might be understated, right? Yeah. The amount of growth that's coming on the internet, it's like, this is your shopping mall right here. And even myself, I watch my kids buy everything off their phone, but even I now, I'm like, just buying things off my phone all the time, but it's e-commerce. And that's not going to slow down. So I like where we're at from a timing perspective, because we're right in the middle of that, parabolic curve that just keeps escalating up as people transition more to e-commerce.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about totality of retail sales, I think it's only about 12% in terms of the data from the government that is coming from e-commerce. So that's also accounting for a ton of different categories that it would be really tough for them to move to e-commerce. But beauty, health, sports nutrition, all those things, the penetration is much higher. So if you think about where we're at today and you think, wow, digital and everything's Amazon, just think in another 5 years. It's not stopping. You know what I mean? We're not even to the point where it's the majority of sales yet in the categories that you work a lot with, I work in a lot with. But I wanted to ask you, now that you're a few steps away from sports nutrition, the brand side, what do you think of the industry? Well,
that's a good question, because I still think of it very similarly as I did 3 years ago when I quote unquote left from the retail side of the business, right? Is I still see a lot of the same market forces at play, right? I see specialty retail just getting squeezed more and more, right? You kind of have e-com and Amazon, and you have mass market, because half of America's already walking through these stores every week anyway. And everything in the middle is just sort of getting squeezed, right? I don't think that squeeze ever goes to zero, right? But if certain retailers don't find a way to become extremely valuable to a consumer, they will not get people to walk in their doors, because you can find that same item anywhere online, right? And if you're not providing any value, then there's no proposition to buy from you, right? So, a great store out in California, Erewhon, right? It's in Venice, and you go in and it's like Whole Foods on steroids, right? But it's the whole experience is just, it's incredible, from driving up and they valet park your car for you, to going in and the smells and the ambiance and everything, and the product assortment, and they have all these unique new brands that you can't find anywhere else that they've invested in to bring in, and every aisle has a person standing in it to help you answer questions, talk about things, and they're very enthusiastic. They're not the guy sitting behind the counter reading a magazine counter that doesn't want to be bothered, right? They're very helpful, but when you take all of that into totality, it's the experience, the value. You want to go there, right? So, that market force, I think, is continually at play, right? Where that inside market between the internet and mass just keeps getting squeezed. I think from a regulatory environment, I think GMP was just the beginning, but it'll continue to get even more stringent. The recent case against ABH Pharma is proof of the fact that we still don't quite have that side of the operations in order, when you can let a company go along for 7 years and violate some of the FDA regulations as they did. And then I think from a price point perspective, right? I see all products or product categories have kind of been marginalized all the way down to, I need my pre-workout, I need my protein, and I need my post-workout. And then everything else is this distant second and tertiary type product. So you see everyone competing for the same 3 product categories. And then consumers have really bracketed the pricing down, rather bracket this way, to the price point they'll accept, right? They won't let you go over this price.
Yep.
And if you go below this price, you're probably deemed as being cheap and not worth buying.
Yep.
So they bracketed you. So you're really stuck, right? So as a brand in retail, you've got to be thinking, where do I go? I either have to go internet or I have to go mass. And what am I going to do with my pricing when I've been bracketed, right? So what I find most interesting are the brands that are really trying to do something different. Not radically different, but coming up with a product concept that just makes you go, wow, that is such a great idea. They didn't reinvent anything. They just did like we were talking, method. They just took something like ordinary like dish soap and made it sexy with packaging, right? Great example is what Ghost has done, right? They just made the product feel sexy and like a lifestyle, and like I want to have this on my counter, right? I love the way it feels and touches, and I love the way the product performs, and I love these flavors that are super exotic, right? They've done a great job of just taking themselves and making themselves different, and by doing so, they have a great story. They're building a community, right? And they can really probably maintain a higher price point. So they can set the higher price point of that bracket and hopefully give themselves better margins. But, that's an example that I see of a brand that is in retail, but that has done something different, right? Yeah. To just not be just like everyone else. And then the other thing that I see is just brands controlling their destiny by being fully dedicated to direct to consumer. Yeah. Where they say, look, the last data I saw at Nutrition Business Journal Summit was, I think over 50% of brands now are launching online only first, right? Like, just what a great way to test. When I think about the resources you have now to be an entrepreneur and start a company, and all the apps and all the services you can use to kind of get off the ground for next to nothing, versus when I started a company, it's just extraordinary. You have everything available to you, right? Yeah. Low barriers to entry, all of that. But I think the point being that if you can find a direct-to-consumer model that really allows you to connect with the consumer, build on your story, generate a community, find a marketing tactic that gives you a positive ROI, you can really elevate that brand very quickly online, direct-to-consumer. And then if you want, you can continue to expand into brick-and-mortar retail and use that direct-to-consumer to catalyze that brand in retail. And those are the brands that I see that are doing very, very successful now in terms of building up their brand awareness and generating sales of their products. And some of them may go into retail and some of them may not. Yeah. But I see that as a way to kind of countermeasure those market forces.
Yeah, and I think from that data around like Nutrition Business Journal, I probably think that they're probably super light if they would consider like the amount of Amazon brands and things like that on that side, because those are in the shadows. Like, a lot of times you just don't know. There's like 10,000 brands that nobody's ever heard of.
Look at how many influencers on Instagram, and TikTok, and
everybody's starting something,
and Facebook that have their own brands.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just become so highly fragmented that when some of these bigger legacy brands are trying to figure out where are they losing, they're kind of sitting in the boardroom going, where are we losing our competitive market share to? It's not just another big legacy brand. It's probably that long tail of all those, influencers that have their own brands that are just sort of chipping away at all the market share, but collectively are taking advantage of the growth in the industry. Growth is there, right? It's just, how are you getting it?
Yeah, the macro growth just continues to show, and I think a lot of people use the word like oversaturation, and they don't really understand what that technically means. I think what they're struggling to see is they're somewhere in the middle. They're the ones getting compressed with all the competition. So they're thinking, well, there's not enough of customers for my product anymore. I used to have, 1,000 more customers last year, 1,000 more customers. So there must be something happening to the market for saturation. But it's a matter of that it's morphing and it's changing into different sections where you have a lot of brands that are competing on non-branded search terms on Amazon, or they're competing against more like a commodity type products. Mm-hmm. They're focused on just trying to get the most amount of eyeballs towards the brand, but not necessarily building propositions off of those product. Like, it's more of like a private label kind of aspect of thinking like that. And then there's the ghosts or the redcons that are building like premium brand experiences. They're trying to actually connect with the community because they know long term that's what's going to sustain their margins for the longest time. The problem with that is there's only so many available brands to do that. A consumer like myself, I'm only going to have a couple of those in my head that I connect with. I'm not going to have 20 or 30 or 40. That doesn't continuously just build. I'm always going to connect with only a few. The rest of them I'm going to trade down because I'm either going to want to save a little money or, whatever reason. People realize that there's so much great product. You don't need to buy from the top of the top. The spread between great products and good products are much closer. Yeah, where it used to be, when there's 20 brands, it's like the best ones and the good ones were so far away from it. You would just, you had that. Now it's tough.
It's a good point you bring up, though. I used to argue about this quite a bit. Coke used to have this strategy, which was Coca-Cola, which was as a mothership company that owned lots of beverages, was share of stomach, right? Is how much during the day can I get them to drink, and how much share of stomach can I get from orange juice to soda to water or whatever. So we used to try to look at what's the share of cupboard I can get when your cupboard's at home, right? Like I have a supplement cupboard. You probably have a supplement cupboard at home, right? I open it up and people kind of freak out sometimes when they look at it like, oh my God, do you have all this stuff? And I'm like, well, I don't use everything, but I'm also a fan of packaging and I hold on to things that I like. But I have my daily supplements that I use every day. But then, we used to look at share of cupboard and there was always this argument that you could, you like bring them in on protein and you go lower price and you take the hit and you sell them all your other products, right? But open up most people's cupboards. That's not how it really works, right? So I always refused to sell a protein, lose money. I always said I wouldn't have a protein unless I own the cows because I don't have any advantage. I can't beat Glanbia, out Glanbia and Glanbia, right? So I refused to sell at a loss and then try to think I could sell them the other products. Because if you open up most people's cupboards, they buy their favorite protein from that brand, they buy their favorite pre-workout from that brand, and they buy their favorite amino from that brand. And that might change a little bit over time, flavor or brand, but you don't typically see all one brand in somebody's cupboard. Right? If you open my cupboard, you would see, Culturel for probiotics, and you'd see, Epicor, and you'd see, my krill oil from another brand, and you'd see my protein from one brand, right? I think what brands have to do is be careful that they don't fall into the mindset that if I build every product category there is, my customer will buy all of my product categories and fill their cupboard with it, because that's not really how it works. The key is be dominant in one thing and use that as a halo, and then let your other products sort of fill in over time, but be very focused on one thing. And that's personally, that's just my philosophy.
No, it's something that I champion a lot for my clients. It's like build these hero SKUs, these hero, like the C4 or whatever, where like, does Cellucor have a great protein? I don't even know if they have a protein right now. It's like, you know what I mean? You build off of one hero, and then you can kind of blanket off of that. You can have different variants, you can have different formats, you can have those sorts of things. Because a lot of times I work in like food and beverage where you think like Oreo. I mean, Oreos are Oreos. They have 40 different variants of an Oreo, but
80% of their sales are still that one double stuffed Oreo.
They're $1 billion brand off of one product. They're not, Oreos and then chocolate chip cookies and then peanut butter cookies and all these types of things. They are one cookie that just has a bunch of different flavors in it. Now, people can argue and be like, well, they have cereal. They license that out to other people. That's not necessarily Oreo or Mondelez that is focusing on those brand managers. They just focus on one thing they're really great at. And for whatever reason, in our space, in the sports nutrition space, a lot of times people want to create 5 different hero SKUs. They think they're going to get the whole basket. They're going to create everything, and everybody's just going to have one brand. And you might have a few customers that do buy every single product of your portfolio, but for the most part, they're probably going to buy your best thing, what you're really great at. And if you're really great at pre-workouts, they're going to buy your pre-workout, and they might buy 4 or 5 different of those flavors. But for whatever reason, people, I don't know if they fully conceptualize like how deep they can go on one hero SKU. I mean, as an example, like a Nutribowl, hundreds of millions of dollars just on C4. I mean, they technically don't need to make anything else if they didn't want to, but they do, and obviously they get some different trace things, and they use it for whatever reason for placements in retail or whatever. But for the most part, they went deep on one SKU, and every once in a while you see brands doing it. I think like even like a Muscle Tech, like with Hydroxycut, they do a really good job at that. But outside of like maybe 2 hero SKUs, you don't normally see more than that. in our space? Like it's usually 2 and then it breaks down.
Well, and if you look at all the categories in general in the marketplace, there's always one clear winner at any given time, right? And it's very hard to knock that one winner off their perch. So what we used to look for at iStory were opportunities that we called when there's going to be a changing of the guard. You can kind of get a sense when you see the bell curve on a product, when you see that it's hit that crest and it's starting to turn down, that's the opportunity to go after that category if you want to win it, right? Because there's always one winner that's the clear leader, and when you try to knock them off when they're at the top, it's really difficult and very expensive to do. But if you can kind of look at the categories and evaluate your competitors and see that there might be a crest where they're getting on that backside of that bell curve, that's your opportunity. Because we used to call it the changing of the guard. If you could be the guard that gets changed, right, you could go after it. You stood a better chance, right? So if you're just trying to compete in the exact same categories as everybody else, and you're using all the same ingredients but maybe different permutation and different amounts, you're just, in the consumer's mind, you're marginally different. There's no reason for them to switch and take a chance, versus if you try to do something that's just different, right? And I used to have this analogy always stuck with me in business, which was I grew up playing hockey and baseball, but hockey was my sport. And when I got to high school, all my friends were playing football, and I thought, I got to try out for football, right? And I remember in middle of the summer, we went to the tryout camp in high school, and we were on the field, and on the 50-yard line, the coach said, hey, we're going to get an idea of who's going to try out for which position. So on this spot, right guard, on this spot, left guard, on this spot, center, on this spot, wide receiver. And he kind of went down the line of all the positions, said, okay, everybody line up for the position you want to try out for, right? What do you think the longest line was? The glory positions, right? Yeah. Receiver and quarterback, right? And I mean, they were like tenfold greater than the other lines. And he said, all right, I'm going to give you all another chance. If you want to play this year, I suggest you find the shortest line. And I thought, that was brilliant, right? Yeah. Because he's right. There could have been a slot that didn't have a person in it. And if you really wanted to play, rather than being the 21st wide receiver, how about being the first left tackle? Maybe not as glamorous, but you're going to get to play, right? And in business, sometimes you have to look in the market and say, where's the shortest line? Right? There's this philosophy that I had of this professor in college. He used to say there's riches and niches, right? Mm-hmm. But you got to find them, right? And so if you can find the shortest line and you can figure out, well, it may not be as glamorous, but there's nobody competing in it, and it's a pretty good size addressable market, and I could own it and be number one, you can make a lot of money in that niche, right? Because you own it. And before anybody even figures out what you're doing, you've already made millions of dollars in sales, and you've developed a customer base, and you can now start to expand the business. But sometimes you just got to step up and not just say, well, hey, I have to compete in these categories, and say, where's the shortest line? Or if you're brave enough, what line hasn't been created yet? Creating a new category is risky and expensive, but you can win. I mean, when we did BioGrow, we had to do a lot of work to try to generate a new concept around something that hadn't existed before, but it paid off, right? But you gotta think differently. You gotta be able to look for the shortest line.
Yeah. Do you think there's those opportunities still in the market? I mean, looking at it from like an outside perspective.
I do, because I see them all the time. I mean, what I love about what we do is we get a bird's eye view of everything. Yeah. So we get brands that come to us, and I just look at the product and I'm like, wow, what a great idea that you guys came up with that. And then I look at their order volume and I think, oh my God, they just created this category and they own it. Who knows, what's the magnitude of this as an addressable market? They build a whole business around that. And it was nothing that I would have ever thought of myself. It was highly creative when I saw it. And I think to myself, and a lot of them, it's usually just blending sort of a packaging concept, a use concept, or not so much an ingredient concept, but an approach to a particular category that's just thought through differently, right? That in of itself creates its own, not necessarily a category, but its own path that they can blaze and connect with the consumer. And to the consumer, it doesn't feel like anything else that's out there.
So if you were, going back to a 21-year-old Stephen, what would you like, and you still want to get into the supplement entrepreneurship side of things. I mean, I get it all the time. Like, I want to start a supplement brand because it's a fun industry. It's a sexy industry. I mean, you're not selling paper clips. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people, they see it and they go, I want to be those guys. I want to be in this industry. If you were in 2020 in that age, like, what would you be focusing on to make sure you're going to be a step ahead of everybody else?
That's a good question, because most of our clients, the owners of the business, are in their early 20s, right? These I call them kids because I have kids as old as they are. They're super bright. They're tenacious, right? And they want to constantly learn, and they have figured out a skill of mastering the digital communication and e-commerce aspect, right? That is the one skill set that I would most certainly acquire at that age. Now, my dad always told me when I was younger, hey, son, if you think you're going to go into business, I always had the entrepreneurial spirit when I was younger. You need to know the numbers, right? If you know the numbers, you can do anything else in the business. And so I got my degree in finance and international studies, but I would be careful not to fall into the trap, though, of the if you ever read the E-Myth, right? The entrepreneur, where you're good at something, right? I'm really good at something, but then I try to go start a business, and it takes away from my good at what I'm normally doing.
Yeah.
And now it makes me focus on running a business, and I may not be good at running a business, right? So you got to be really careful that you don't, kind of think that you might be good at running it. And you never know unless you try, but you can also bring in people that can help you run a business too. But you got to be careful because, sometimes if you're just really good at being an influencer, let's say, right, it might be best for you just to stay endorsing a brand and make good money. But thinking like, well, I can go run a business and start my own supplement company, that's a whole nother endeavor, right? And you got to be careful. And I guess the moral there is just be careful what you sign up for, right? But I think if I were to start over, I would focus on understanding the digital platform and how best to communicate and reach customers, and acquire the skills necessary to understand how to generate commerce, right? Because the barriers to entry are so low, right? You can learn things so quickly now. You can YouTube, you can go to some networking conferences, and you can figure this stuff out very, very quickly. And it would be to really understand, and I would just test things very quickly. I might have 10 product ideas, and I would try to test them and figure out which ones I think might win, and work through those until I found one that won, rather than getting attached to one concept and just drive it forward and never let up because I'm so vested in it and it's my baby and I don't want it to fail. Is I would test things very quickly, but I would learn the skill set of direct commerce because of the timing and because of the way the market is moving, and because once you learn that and you understand that, you just simply can apply that into expanding your distribution.
Yeah, no, I like that because I respect people that can go all in on one thing. Like, you get these entrepreneurs that are like all in on it. I've always my brain's always went towards like the testing thing, like the minimum viable product type of thing. Like, I'm going to put out 10 ideas, let's see how they go. And that's a lot of times with my content that I put out, I put out daily stuff. It's always because I'm trying to reinforce different things. I'm trying to see how the market or like the audience is like responding. It's like, are they validating my ideas, or what are the questions they're asking around that? Should I be digging deeper in certain areas? And I think it's on the same side of like starting a brand. It's like you can do so many different kind of tests with the technology today. Like, I mean, with selling on digital, like you can have a bunch of A/B tests running constantly on even one particular product, or you can have multiple products. You have a thing like Amazon that can give you feedback loops that are much quicker than what you're used to getting from,
Your feedback is instant.
Yeah, it's like those types of things. Like, use the platforms for the value in which they can bring to you. Like leverage them the most you can. For whatever reason, they're looking at them as a sales channel, but not as an opportunity to just like have an immense amount of learning opportunities about just about business in general. Like, you might start with one idea and then it morphs through all the tests into something completely different, but you got to at least a market validated, supported thing to go all in on, other than just like my brain said this is going all in. Brand creation, whatever. It was always like, let's force things down to the customer. Let's tell them what we think they should buy. Where now it's like there's the customers pulling up saying, this is what we want to buy. And if you then have to go out and kind of listen to the customer, and that's through all those tests, you get to something that the customer is literally telling you, we want this, and then you can go all in after you've learned that. But a lot of times, like a lot of entrepreneurs still try to do the push thing, like, oh, we know best what the consumer wants, over let's just listen to the consumer and work that way.
Yeah, it reminds me of you saying that reminds me of I don't know if you've ever read Lean Startup, but the philosophy there is hypothesize your business model and keep testing and tweaking your business model till you find something that works, and be a little agnostic to the product, right? And that's a great way to learn very quickly what's going to work, rather than just kind of going out and thinking something's going to work and it doesn't. Either you go back with your tail between your legs, or you keep pushing and spending money, trying to get something to work that's never really going to work. But I think about back in the day of like, you develop this product and you get buy-in from GNC, and then they put it on all the shelves, and then you run all the ads, and then you were like, I hope it sells, right? And then, and then if it did, great. And then if it didn't, you're like, what do I do with all this product, right? And that was a really bad place to be in. And I think now, to your point, you have an instant feedback loop, like really, really quickly, where you can generate tests and learn so quickly what's going to work, what's not going to work, how to modify, how to pivot. But going to what we were talking about earlier is you've got to have patience, right? You've got to be willing to say, look, maybe I won't generate $1 million the first year or the first month, right? Maybe it will take some time, where, Gary Vaynerchuk is, you got to eat some shit for a year, right? Like, or two. And I will tell you that of all of our brands that we carry here at QuickBox and service, the ones that are very, very successful, which, most of them are extremely successful in my opinion, they just ate shit for a couple of years figuring it out, right? They did it all themselves, or maybe one other partner, and they worked out of their house, and they just kept grinding until they found that thing, and then they just drove it home. But none of them just like put up an ad and like hit pay dirt on the first day and went, let's go, right? You gotta have patience, right? It just takes, and it's not that much patience. It's not like you gotta wait 10 years, but you gotta put in a year or two where you just kind of figure out how that model works, and then you start to scale it.
Yeah, I mean, the instant gratification, I think that's what drives everybody at this point, you know what I mean? I think of everything long-term, which I think people really get thrown off by all the time, because they're like, okay, what do you want out of this? I'm like, I don't want anything. I'm just trying to add a bunch of value. I'm trying to work on something that's 10 years from now. I'm not even worried about what's
a lot of people, I know this because I've been around sports nutrition industry for a while. A lot of people, and being a business owner myself for many years, never thought of strategy, right? We just did, right? Yeah. Just did what felt right, did what we thought. And it wasn't until I put together a board when I was private, because I just thought, I got to get some people around me that are really, really smart. Been there, done that. I had a guy from Procter & Gamble. I had the ex-president of Kinko's. I had, I had some great people around me that, used to just say, what is the strategy? Can you clearly articulate your strategy? And it wasn't until I started to really think about it that it changed and differentiated the business. And, I think you bringing this subject matter to executives in the industry is important, because the older ones kind of get it because they've been around long enough. They know strategy is important, but the younger ones don't quite understand, well, what is strategy? What does that really mean? I'm just kicking butt right now. Why do I need a strategy? Well, you do, because otherwise your business is going to be very short-lived, and then what do you do, right? So I think getting people to think about this is very, very important.
Yeah, this has been a multi-year thing. This is almost 8 years almost in at this point. And, when I first started out doing anything around the consulting space, I had to explain to people even what was a management strategy consultant. That wasn't, a thing. They thought, oh, you're going to get us into Target, you're a broker. You
don't fill a specific role, right? Yeah. It's like, what do you mean think about strategy?
Yeah,
what is that?
And to me, it's like, there's an outside perspective that is completely unbiased, in the sense of, as much as you can be unbiased, and being completely agnostic around, what is the goal, and then how do we work back to that? I always ask the question when I work with brands, is like, what is your your end goal here? What's your exit strategy? And a lot of times they're like, what? And I'm like, okay, are you trying to sell? Are you trying to stay in the business for 10 years? Are you trying, like, what are we trying to get to here?
And by the way, there's no wrong answer to that.
No,
I always get a lot of
yes.
people who say, well, you should never think about the end. And I disagree with that, because I think you should, because that helps dictate your strategy, right? If you're going to back into an exit and you want to do it fast, that changes your strategy from, hey, I just want to make a lot of money for the next 10 years. Cool, great answer, but that changes your strategy.
And I asked that question right off the bat, and they go, well, we're hiring you to do a go-to-market on this product. And I go, I get that that's the project's scope right now, but I'm trying to ask you the question of, are you pushing all your chips in because in the next 2 years, you want that to prove out that you can create a new category, a new format that then you want to exit at a multiple. If I know that, then I know I have to build the solution to that result. If you tell me this is a pet project and I want to, kind of have this around for 5 years and kind of see what it is because I want to take it myself, or, you get all these different answers. I'm going to build it completely different, the solution. I'm not going to just go in there and go, here's my ebook or here's my 10 steps to do this the best way. It's like, for me, I need to know, where we're going with all this before you build it, or I'm going to provide you the wrong path.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, or no strategy at all, right? I have a client who very successful in direct-to-consumer marketing, has a great supplement, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, CVS called him up and said, "We want to carry you in 7,000 stores." Yeah. And he went, "I got to do this." And I said, "Oh, time out. What is your retail distribution strategy? Yeah. This has to be part of a play, not just go sell to one store because they called you." Well, what do you mean distribution strategy? So we got to think through the whole playing field of what mass market looks like for your brand, the impact it's going to have on direct-to-consumer, and what do you need? Because once you start getting in a certain number of doors, you got to start getting ACV quickly. You got to get as many doors as you can to capitalize on your marketing, and so it just never crossed his mind to think about that. It was just, can I sell something? And it might not have even been the right choice for him to go into mass at all, right? Now, we did talk through it. He eventually built I didn't build it for him, but I made him think about how to build a distribution plan, connected him into some certain networks, and now he's got multiple mass retailers and it's working really well for him. But had we not just taken the second to just, hey, time out, let's think about this. How does this play into where you're headed? Because ultimately he does want to sell the brand. And I said, well, then that's a good place to be by getting more visibility and more doors and showing that you have velocity because you can generate it through direct to consumer. And I was just glad I had the opportunity to kind of guide him through that before he just went into one store and had no idea what he was getting into. As you know, like every mass market has different terms and different expectations and what's their turn. He had no idea about any of that. So I was glad we had the opportunity to kind of help him think about that first.
Yeah, I argue like in the sports space, a lot of times you have the shooting stars, and people always wonder like, why does this keep happening? Why does this keep happening? And I don't think that there's enough time put on the strategy side of things. Also, that's just one piece of a multi-point in terms of why. But I think that, if you don't, as an example with that CVS deal, like if you didn't know how to answer yes or no on that, and you just said yes all the time, then you start building inventory, you start building all these things, and then it doesn't go well, and then you're not capitalized correctly. You're not like, I think on my side, like I am looking at all those linkages together to like when there is something on the kind of strategic map or the tree that you're at, if you do get presented with CVS, you already know, okay, if I say yes, then I'm through this path. If I say no, I'm going to go through this path. And you can make that decision quickly. And then you know which other linkages, like what do I need to do on the finance side? What do I need to do on the operations side? Do I need to create, certain JVs to like ramp up a production on something? Like if you just going by the seat of your pants, you're going to say yes. And then you're going to do things sloppy. And then that's what happens. Like, the joke always in the industry is like GNC's bankrupt more brands than they've built. You know what I mean? Where a lot of people go in like GNC is the end all be all. I want to be in there. I have to be in there. And then they realize that they don't get the turns. You have a ton of returns come back to you, and you're sitting on a bunch of inventory you don't know what to do with, and you don't have the cash to pay payroll or anything, and you end up in this like vicious cycle that sometimes people get out of, but most of the time they don't, and these brands die. Yeah. So I think for me, like a lot of times it's that strategy that gets you to at least a better understanding of the decisions that you need to make when you do have these like big things that come up. And they also work with smaller ones, but I think like a lot of times these big ones are where strategy, like if you thought it or not, makes a difference.
As a business owner, you need to be thinking about it, right? Because it does dictate, the tactics and the resources and the structure and the people and the skills you bring into your company, but it has to start from there. But that has to be developed from the top down. And sometimes you can let your strategy kind of emerge through your testing, and you're like kind of figuring out your way and what's winning, and then you say, okay, now from this point, this is my jump off point, I want to go here. Now how do I develop a strategy to get there?
Yeah, and I don't think like for me, advocating, and I do work with some brands that are like pre-revenue, but a lot of times I tell people when they contact me and say, hey, can you help? Or I say, go out and sell something, like just sell, like just create some revenue. Like, see if somebody actually wants to buy what you're giving them. Like, you want to. Well,
that's an example of me talking about where we used to do the kiosks
yeah,
at the mall. We
would
build a small batch, go to the mall, and try to sell it. If we couldn't get anybody to exchange money for our product, we kind of knew we had a failure on our hands. But if, the other example was we couldn't, keep it in stock that day, people were buying it left and right, we knew we had something special. Doesn't mean it's going to be successful long term, but it proved, right, that people were willing to exchange their money for our product.
Yeah, strategies. I mean, it's only worth something if there's actually a viable product that's back. And we're talking obviously from a consumer product standpoint, but I can't out strategy a bad product in the sense like I need to at least have one that meets the market requirements of whatever that category is, and it's at the right price points. And that's also part of what I do in terms of strategy. You can obviously make sure that you have those things validated correctly. But I think at the core, like,
it just reminds me. You reminded me of on my board. I had a guy from Procter and Gamble, and he used to always say, he had a saying which was, the best way to kill a bad product is good advertising, right? Because you get people to try it, but then they don't like it, right? And I see that all the time. People rush a product to market. They don't really think it through. It may not be the exact right great flavor, or the formula doesn't perform right, but they're like, but I got to get this to market, right? And it just doesn't go anywhere, right?
When you're talking about the kiosk thing, I always tell a lot of like food entrepreneurs to go out to local
like
farmers market. I say just set up a stand and just try to sell things at prices and tell different stories. And
but again, this goes
works.
back to patience. People don't have enough patience to just test their ideas out and see does it actually work, right? I mean, that's why I get so into the watching Shark Tank, because I've been in that seat so many times, raising capital, different, where I'm trying to figure out, but all those questions that they ask are always valid, right? Yeah. Have you actually tried to sell this? And you see them perk up when they're like, yeah, I've sold $1 million in the last 3 months. They're like, how'd you do it? And the guy's like, set at a farmer's market and sold the product. They're like, great. That's what they want to see, right? Because they know, one, you're willing to put in the work. Two, you have some patience. But three, you validated your idea.
Yeah. We used to, we were talking yesterday about Mark Lobliner and like the Outright Bar, and like how, as a CEO, you don't see too many CEOs literally going and like hitting the streets one by one at store level.
Mark will win. He will win because, one, he has a great product. Two, it's different, right? Three, he is the hardest working guy in the industry. He will literally visit every store in America over the next year or two until that bar has all the shelf space they've ever wanted, right? And then the velocity will come from just people loving the bar, right? So in the end, he will win. He's got all the right elements, and then it will just come down to their ability to play out their strategy long term, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I mean, he's willing to do the dirty stuff that a lot of people just have gotten too big for their britches to do. And he's like, I know this has worked my whole career and it's going to continue to work, because literally if you could sell something to another human in front of them, like that skill translates to so many other things. I mean, that's how I started in the industry, was like doing demos. Like literally that taught me so much about just the industry as a whole. And I always kind of go back to that, because I'm like, I remember having to stand across another person and explain the product to them in a way that they're going to buy it. Like, but if you never actually did that, like you're so removed from the actual like the consumer, which ultimately is driving everything at the end of the day. I mean, like if they're going to continuously support you and you can sell to them and give them value and they relate back, like your business is going to do extremely well, as long as all the other attributes are there. But like that is, I think, a skill set that is lost a lot of times. And we're going back to like the digital side, like because a lot of times you're not really seeing the customer. A lot of times, it's a data point on the thing, and that not necessarily means that those people are not selling, they're selling differently, but I would bet they would think about things a lot differently if they did go to a store or Arnold Classic or whatever one of those things, and then sell to another human being right across from them. Like that would give them a different perspective on the whole.
Yeah, you learn so much. You learn what are all their questions. You learn what are their objections. You learn your price point, right? You find the sweet spot. You can get all those things in real time by interacting directly with a consumer.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to help support me, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button on this video. If this is the first time you've been introduced to my videos, would love for you guys to be a part of my community by subscribing to my channel. I upload several videos just like this weekly. And if you guys want to connect further outside of this platform, I do include all of my social media links down below. I just want to thank you guys again for your time. Hopefully I gave you some value in return, and we'll see you guys on the next video.